Okay, thanks for everybody for coming today. I have about 1,000 slides. I will reference very few of them, and I'm just here to tell you a story. That's the rule. You should walk away knowing my story. You can refer to the slides later. Deal? Okay. So, I've been in this industry for a lot of years. Like I'm coming up on 30, oddly, I think. And it has never been this active, period. It is dynamic, meaning it's changing daily. If you are an employer and you do business in the United States, which I assume you do, because you're here, you need to be thinking about your drug testing policy, your drug testing program, and you really need to be thinking about ripping it down and restructuring it to some degree. Now, I'm not here to say, like, go run out and find your account manager at DISA and panic, because I'm not, but I want you to understand how this is changing, and if you're in a strategic role in your company, what you need to be thinking about over the next 15 years, 10 years, 5 years, 3 years, because it's kind of all over the board, including, you know, as of this morning, we just heard that tomorrow we'll see the oral fluid drug testing guidelines from SAMHSA. So if you thought you wanted to read 188 pages worth of new regs that are going to hit you, then that's your weekend plans. You've got them now. So they're changing very fast. You can't anymore just sort of sit, say, I have a policy, it's there, this is what we do, this is how we do it. You really have to be thinking about it. And so today, I'm not going to just talk about what's happening. I just want to kind of get it in your head why it's changing, why it could be changing. And I can't answer the questions. We're going to do a policy later at like 4:30. We'll talk about policy. I'm not going to talk about specifics in policy. I just want you to get a concept of how it's changing and why it's changing so fast and why in your role you need to be paying attention to it. So there I am. We're going to talk about why, and this will be the fastest part of why, because it should be fairly intuitive for you. Then we're going to talk about the change and what's creating this giant change. And then about the risk, and then sort of like what you can think about in terms of redesigning your program or your policies or whatever's happening in your workplace. Or if you've got nothing to do, by the way, it's okay, but it's an interesting cocktail conversation to have with people. So drug use in the workplace, whether you are pro-marijuana legalization, whether you are in a state where there's an enormous opioid issue, it's an issue. And some of this, you can rely on these, and I'm sorry, I don't have a mic, so I kind of have to stand here, it's weird. But you can rely on these statistics. The challenge for you in your positions, whatever it is, safety or HR, is we're running businesses. And so to some degree, you've got to be able to not only articulate and understand statistics like this, but you have to be able to monetize it, right? What's the return on the investment? If I'm doing a drug testing program and I want to add to my panel or I want to change my methodology, I've got to go to the powers that be and be able to say to them, this is why I'm doing this. This is my choice. This is why I need to invest more in this. And we're going to see that drug testing is changing from what it historically was. And what it historically was a bit of an assessment, right, for pre-employment. We're about to do a significant change from that. And it isn't something that is theoretically coming. It is coming. There are just a lot of variables that will affect what exactly comes down for each of you in different environments in different states. So most people, and this is a survey the Current Consulting Group does, most people still do lab-based urine testing. It is the industry standard. Now, when we see these guidelines come out, SAMHSA will, they're publishing them, and then the DOT will somehow address what they're going to do with them. And so we will likely see this change as a result of that. There'll be a longer, there's probably about an 18-month implementation period, so we'll see that. But this is pretty much standard, and this has been pretty much standard for the beginning of time. Like it really hasn't changed dramatically. What percentage of your drug testing is pre-employment? Lots of people just do 100% pre-employment. 22% say it's mostly pre-employment. 23, you add the two together, you got 50% saying, yeah, it's mostly pre-employment. That's kind of what we do, right? When you look at when the last time you changed your drug testing policy, any of you, and a lot of you may have participated in this study, It was about 900, almost 1,000 employers this year. Anyone who's above that 6 to 12 month line, you're out of compliance. As of January 1, 2020, who knows what you got to change? Anybody daring raising their hand? Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, Clearinghouse, you got to change your FMCSA policy if you're an FMCSA employer. So you've got to do it for that. Now we've got oral fluids, but it isn't that I'm worried about. It's the 480 laws in 2019 alone that affect workplace drug testing. 480. Lots will pass, lots won't, lots will be reconfigured and then be brought up again next year, but there's 480 of them. So if you're doing business in those states, you've got to keep up because they can affect your workplace drug testing policy. When you talk about the importance of policy, almost everybody says, yeah, we think it's important, and then almost everybody says, yeah, but we're not 100% sure we've got it. And the policy is really, you know, it's the foundation, and it's not just the foundation, but it sort of memorializes, it also protects you, right? And so what are the chances that you're going to be sued? Probably small. I don't know your business, right? Chances are you're going to be sued. I have a tiny consulting firm. Guess what we have? Professional liability insurance. Why? Because there's a chance, right? There's a chance. And so you have insurance. Your policy is your insurance. You want to have the best insurance policy that you can. And so why? Why am I saying you're out of date on your policy? It's not to scare you. It's to just sort of set up what's changing. And we're going to start with the change, and we're going to talk about impairment. And the reason I'm talking about impairment is because it is the thing that is disrupting. Okay? So there are two things that are disrupting us. What does it mean to be impaired? There are legal definitions of impairment, right? There are scientific definitions of impairment. But when you think about it, I think all of us kind of use the same, we use these interchangeably, under the influence and impaired. And they're kind of two different things. So if I drank a big old bourbon, one glass, I am definitely under the influence. Doesn't mean I'm impaired, right? It doesn't mean I'm impaired. It doesn't mean I'm legally impaired, but I'm under the influence of it. What crosses the line to impairment is the state of being diminished, weakened, or damaged, especially mentally or physically. Now, I got news for you. Even if I'm not a .08, when I have one bourbon, I'm diminished. I'm always diminished after one bourbon. So I could get pulled over in my car and I could pass, but there's a reason that at a roadside test, they also perform other tests because it's really the linkage of two. And so I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a doctor, I'm none of those things. I've just been doing this my whole life. And so it is, you know, the combination of those two things that really says this is what impairment is. And why did we not really care about impairment except for alcohol testing in the past? We didn't even really talk about it a lot then, right? But now we have to talk about impairment a whole lot. And the reason is because the marijuana laws that are really the cyclone that's happening here, and I actually will explain why I say that, but they're changing things for us. And again, that's why you've got to be so active and think about it. So when you look at marijuana, I actually met with Frank Bernard this morning and I said to him, listen to me. That's how I talk. I said, look, there's a hurricane. I'm 100% certain that there is a giant hurricane brewing. And marijuana is what started. I'm not saying if it's good or bad. I'm not telling you if I'm pro-legalization or con. It has nothing to do with that. What I'm saying is there's a hurricane. It's huge. I don't know if it's going to take the European model or the US model or some other model, or if it's going to slow down, or if it's going to speed up, if it's going to get worse, where it's going to hit. So the challenge is, as you know, a consultant in this industry, people are saying, all right, so where is it going to hit? I'm like, I don't know, right? Because there's a lot of different things that can impact where it hits and how it hits. And unfortunately, for employers, when you're looking at your risk mitigation, right? Risk mitigation, new words. We used to talk about pre-employment, post-employment, post-accident, pre-employment. Start talking about risk mitigation and start talking about how that's going to affect your workplace. And the reason is because of this. right? We don't know what's going to happen. What we do know is there's no set impairment level for marijuana. So despite the fact that many states actually choose, and we're going to talk about that, they write in their new laws that as an employer, you have to be able to show that a person was impaired in order to give a drug test for THC. There's not readily available technology right now. Now it is in the works, right? But it's not here now. There are not laws that are based on science that equate to impairment. And if you look at that, it is no different than what we looked at for 30 years with alcohol. Alcohol, well, impairment's no different, right? We took us since 1930, I think, to decide what impairment is going to be for alcohol, and now Utah has actually dropped from 0.08 to 0.05. So we're still fiddling with it, right? Because it's not exact. But now they're asking you to be exact and to use that as an employer as your barrier to entry to test for THC. And so you've got to understand, and it's changing rapidly. And to give you some perspective on the change, I say like remember. It's ridiculous because you're probably not thinking about this. That's all I think about. So 1996, California legalized marijuana for medicinal purposes. They were the first state. We didn't see recreational marijuana legalized for a long time. 2012, we saw Colorado and Washington legalize, right? Since 2012 to now, 2019, we've seen 34 states legalized for medicinal purposes. And by the way, all over the board, right? Everybody does it differently. Everybody does it differently. So you've got 34 states plus DC. DC is my favorite of all, by the way. Then you have 11 states who've already approved recreational marijuana. Again, all over the board, rules are different, everything's different. There's per se legal limits in a couple states, they're based on nothing. They're based on politics, pretty much. They had to throw it in there, so they threw it in there, right? So we don't know what that's gonna be. They vary widely. So look at how this is condensing, and now know that starting in 2020, we have 2 states and New York City who are basically prohibiting employers from testing for THC with the exception of some safety-sensitive positions. So we're going to talk about that, but that's how quick this is moving, right? It took us all those years to get to recreational marijuana, and now in this short time, we've gone from 2012 to 2019, we've gone to, all right, recreational, and heck, now let's go, rally, we're going to go, and now let's stop testing for it. And so that's how quickly it's moving. So it isn't, like I said, it isn't like we think maybe things are changing. I'm 100% sure it's changing. I just don't know exactly how. Why I say DC is my favorite is because it's fabulous. And if you go to DC, I have a super, super smart nephew who just started at Georgetown. And he's like, this place rocks. I'm 18. I'm like, oh God, I'm afraid of what you're going to tell me. So you can go into a distributor in DC. But the way their law is written, you can't buy it. You can't buy pot. It's recreationally available. You can't buy it. You can't manufacture it. You can't distribute it. You can't bring it in from a neighboring state. I was like, so you gotta get a drone? What do you gotta get a drone? You don't have to get a drone. What you do is you go in. You're shaking your head. You must have done this. So you go in and you say, I would like, whatever, I want this 100 milligram of THC, this 3 candy bars, I want 2 gummy bears, and I want whatever else. And they say, okay, the cookies are going to cost you $74. Because they can't sell the pot. So you buy the cookies. The cookies are plain, by the way. You can give those away. They don't have pot in them. You can't buy it. They can't sell it. So you buy the cookies, and they give you the pot for free. Fabulous. It's fabulous. If you play the game, again, people, I got no other things to do in my life. I do watch Netflix, but I also play the game of let's land in California or let's land in Nevada. And by the time my wheels touch down and I'm allowed to turn on my cell phone, which I generally do a little earlier than they do that ping on the airplane, I say, how fast can I have pot at my hotel? You can have hot pot at your hotel before you check in. Ease, it's this great little, if you're in California, you know Ease, right? It's a fabulous experiment. That's how fast and easy this is. That's how fast it's changed. Now, what we don't know is all the pieces of it, right? We still don't know how, again, not pro or con, but we don't know. So the argument is it's the same as alcohol. Well, it's not the same as alcohol because it's actually the only drug in America that is medicinally and recreationally available. And so it doesn't follow the rules, doesn't follow any rules. So, you know, like some of the other things perhaps that we have done in this country without thinking it all through, like cigarettes and vaping and opioids, we're probably going to have to dial it back at some time, but we're about to find out. So they don't follow the rules of alcohol. You don't follow the rules of regular drugs, right? Because again, a regular drug is usually, think about an opioid, it's usually either regulated or it's not, right? It's either legal or it's not. PCP's easy, it's illegal, period. Opioids, right? You think about opioids when you say things like, when your employees come to you and say things like, you know, it's okay, I'm all right with it. And when you as an employer say, all right, if it's a non-regulated, if it's a non-safety sensitive position, we're okay with it. It's okay, right? Remember this, Tylenol 3 with codeine is an opioid. Been around forever. How many of you would prescribe Tylenol 3 with codeine in your life? Whole lot of you. I'm not gonna ask, but I'm hoping that you were not then shooting up in the back alley shortly thereafter. Fentanyl is an opioid, right? So when I was in college, way back when, pot was about 7 or 8% THC, which is the thing that gets you high. Now, there are products that are 96% THC, right? So in your policy, do you talk about CBD, right? CBD, it's the Wild Wild West. I don't know if we talk about CBD because here's the answer. The answer is, I have no idea. It's supposed to follow those rules, right? CBD does not get you high. So you can, yeah, I get it at my dog groomers. You could get it at the dog groomers. I'm like, what does that do to your dog? I'm not, oh, it's fabulous. It does 8,000 things. You can't go anywhere. My kids are like, please do not talk. Because you're like in line somewhere and they'll be like, oh yeah, I use the CBD stuff for like, and I look 74 years younger. The minute I put it on my face, I'm like, oh my God, it's like snake oil. It's fabulous. It's like, it does nonsense. People are making it up as they go along. So can you test positive from it? Probably, yeah. Because it's not, it isn't like Tylenol, right? You don't get to go and say, these are the ones for the droppers, and it says this, and you pull out the little thing, and then you put on your reading glasses, and you try and figure out how many drops, and then you're like, all right, you're too old for this, but we don't have any in the house, it's 3 a.m., drink that bottle, and we'll go get the other next one next time, because we had the wrong one, so we're assuming you should just take that, more of it, right? I remember being a kid and eating Johnson's baby aspirins, and we'd be like, how much do you weigh? And you'd have to multiply. You'd be like, I'm going to take 74 of them because they taste delicious. And the other ones are disgusting, so we're going to do those. Right? You don't have that kind of information anymore. And so that's what people are dealing with. You see people who are coming to you as employers and saying, I tested positive, but I was using CBD, and I thought it was okay. The MROs, they're not here to tell you if it's okay. They don't know. They can't prove or disprove. The answer is it could be right? They could have been telling the truth. I don't know. It's supposed to have 0.03% THC in it. Maybe you got to use a lot of it. Maybe you're rubbing it all over and taking a bath in it. I don't know. But the MRO's job is not to tell you that as an employer. They can't figure that out, right? They are not here to tell you if people are using things as prescribed. And so they're just as helpless in it in some way as you are. So you've got to address those things, right? You've got to address those things. So talk about pre-employment and the testing in the states, right? These are the states that are starting to change things for you. So in Nevada, effective January 1, 2020, these are the only things I actually read my notes on. Employers cannot fail or refuse to hire prospective employees because of marijuana metabolites in a drug test. Includes limited protections for safety-sensitive industries. Now, all of these say federally mandated tests are preempted, so you don't have to worry about that. So your DOT drivers, your DOT-covered employees, they're still you can still test them as is for now. Who knows what's going to happen in 20 years, right? New York City, effective May 2020, May 9th, technically, prohibits testing for THC as a condition of employment. There's also limited protections for safety-sensitive. If you've got safety-sensitive people who are not on the list, you can go to them and you can get them on the list, except they show where the list is, but nothing's on the list. I don't know if it will be on the list. We have a state law database, and there are conflicting laws in states. When we call those states and we say, we really need you to help us interpret what's happening here, they say, we have no idea who does that. What do you think? They literally don't know. In many cases, they don't know, and they have conflicting laws, okay? So you've got to know. So when this starts to happen, what are you going to do? Is it where the person works, if they're doing a job in New York City? Or is it where they live? They come in and out? I got people who go from Philadelphia, they do the commute every day to New York City. Does that apply to them or not? Better figure it out, right? Illinois legalizes recreational marijuana, 21 years or older. They got all the tax stuff down. They always have all the tax stuff down. Employers can adopt reasonable drug-free workplace policies applied in a non-discriminatory manner. Employer must have a good faith belief that an employee is under the influence and measure articulable, which I can never say, symptoms, right? So again, well, now we're talking about that impairment thing. So how do you prove impairment? You better know the different methodologies and the pros and cons. And by the way, guys, when they start to talk about impairment as the new barrier, why does it matter? If you're an employer in New York, by the way, I'm not going to give you any answers today. I'm just going to make you think. Why does it matter if I am impaired by coming to your job, right? I'm non-DOT, but I'm safety sensitive by your rules, right? I'm driving a forklift. One day I'm going to really drive a forklift. Driving a forklift. I'm taking my 5 milligrams of oxycodone as legally prescribed by my doctor. Just like my bourbon, I'm impaired. So how come it's okay that I can do that and be impaired, but you just did a law that says I can't be impaired by THC? What's the difference? I don't know, but I'm going to find a good lawyer who's going to ask you that question, people. And then guess who's going to pay? You guys, right? So again, paying attention, being active, getting involved is pretty important. So why is it important, right? When we talk about traditional testing and pre-employment, we talk about it as an assessment, right? And there are biases in assessments, and you guys all do it, right? You do background checks, you do fitness for duty, you post job descriptions, and you say, here's what I'd like. Now, you can't say, I'd like a pretty young woman to come and do this job. I'd like a strappingly handsome young man to come in and be my assistant. Not allowed. But you can say, I'd like an MBA with 6 years of relevant experience in this discipline, blah, blah, blah. You can set those rules. They're somewhat arbitrary, but they're non-discriminatory, and so you can do that, and that's allowed. It is not to say that the person who had the MBA and 4.5 years of experience was not the better candidate, but you've set that and you use it as a tool. It's an assessment. And that's historically what drug testing is done, right? 80% of the testing that we do in the United States is pretty much pre-employment testing. So you've said, we're going to decide what our background check package is, we're going to decide if there are occupational health requirements, and then we're going to decide about drug testing. It does not mean you're a good human or a bad human. It's just the thing we've said and we've chosen to do, but now you're getting limited. Here's the problem with that. Again, not pro, not con, nothing about that, but it's risk, and that is what it is. You are stewards in your company to be profitable, even if you're a nonprofit, right? You want to be successful. And so the question is, are you willing to assume the risk that these new laws are putting on you? So when I get my new lawyer and I come to work for you, and I decide that I want to take my oxycodone and I sue you, who's paying? You are. When you look at the case law that is forming how these things are happening, you see about 10% of the cases, because 90% of civil litigation in the United States gets settled. We don't see those, right? So if you're saying, hey, we're just going to wait because it's all right, like back to that insurance policy, right? The risk is low. We think we're good. We're going to hang, and we're going to watch how this plays itself out in the courts. The issue is 90% of how this is playing itself out in the courts ain't showing up on your radar, right? So go back to what I said way back when and said, how are you going to prove your return on investment? You have to get good. You have to look at these stats, and you've got to look what's available. You've got to look at what's coming out of Colorado. You've got to look at what's coming out of Washington. You've got to look at the states who've legalized earlier. You've got to look at the states where the opioid epidemic is still raging. And you've got to say, what am I going to do? What has happened there, and can I use it to start to design or think about what we're going to do in the next 10 years or 5 years or 3 years, right? You've got to be thinking about all of those things, and you've got to use these statistics. One of the statistics that I don't believe is in this deck, but I'm not going to lie, I can't remember exactly, is from the AAA Foundation, and they do fabulous studies. And their studies now are about impairment, legalized impairment and for different drugs. And one of the studies, I'm not going to quote it exactly, hopefully it's in this deck, it said 14.8 million people that responded in the past 30 days would get behind the wheel within an hour of using marijuana. How many would show up to their jobs? If 14.8 million will come to get behind a wheel, and by the way, guess why they say, there's another slide, I don't have the exact one on that, but what they say is, because we're not going to get caught. Right? They're like, they literally say, because we don't think we'll get caught. It isn't because I don't think I'm going to hurt somebody or kill myself. It's because I don't think I'm going to get caught. So 14.8 million people said to you, I'm comfortable getting behind the wheel. Are they comfortable getting behind the forklift? I don't know if they really have a wheel. Things I should learn. I think about them when I'm up here. Right? Would they get behind that? Would they access all of your personal information? Would they access all the financial information for all of your clients? Would they cause a data breach that's going to cause your stock to drop by half? Put you on the front page of every newspaper, make you sit in front of Congress and do that, right? So that's where fiscal responsibility comes into this mix, and you've got to be thinking about how that would impact you. It is a risk mitigation strategy, people. It is a cost containment strategy that is changing. It is no longer a part of just saying, do we think this person's qualified? And as those rights become more and more limited, you as an employer have your risk go way up. And so the cost associated with that risk starts to increase, and you will bear the cost of it. And so just like you're now seeing these things where there's like the e-vaping deaths, guess whose insurance is paying for that, right? Your insurance. So when your provider comes back to you and says, yeah, we got to raise your rates this year, well, why? I don't know, because how many, did you look at the data in Colorado? Did you look at the data in Washington where they said ER visits are shooting through the roof now? Why? Because here's what it works, right? So I went to I shouldn't say these things. So I went to a distributor in Colorado with my brother. He was like, please don't act like a narc and embarrass me. I'm like, it's fine. I'll be very cool. We'll go in. And I said to the guy, I'm heading up to Rocky Mountain State Park with 17 kids. And so I wanted to buy some pot. I was like, yeah, it probably would have been a good idea had I used it. And I said, so what should I buy? I've not done it since college. He said, you should get this candy bar. It's 100 milligrams of... No, I said, well, how much marijuana is in it? And he said, 100%. I'm like, oh, no, because you just went over the, like he was talking to me about the chocolate and the guy who'd made the chocolate and how it's delicious. I'm like, yeah, but it can't be 100% pop because there's chocolate in it. Like, I'm not a scientist, but I figured that out all by my big girl self. He's like, oh God, you're so right. I'm so sorry, lady. And so he's like, no, it's 100 milligrams. And I said, well, how much should I take? He's like, well, you can have like that candy bar in a day is fine. I was like, oh, again. I would be very impaired. Are you kidding me? Like, that's a fantastic amount of marijuana. That's a lot. So what's happening there? Why are the ER visits going on? It's not, again, good, bad, or indifferent. The ER visits are going up because people are saying, all right, that's different, right? You take a hit of a one-hitter, right? You take a hit off a bong, you're high pretty fast, right? You take an edible, has to go through your whole system. If you just ate a big steak, you know how that goes, right? If any of you have ever had a drink, if you just had a big steak and a giant baked potato, the glass of wine hits you a little bit slower. If you haven't eaten all day, You're trying to do that whole paleo nonsense, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, that wine hit me fast, right? So it's the same thing. I'm going to pop one in my mouth. I'm going to wait. I'm not high. Remember, I have 4 teenage girls. Again, reasons I drink. 4 teenage girls. If you were a teenage girl or a teenage boy, I'm going to like put you back, right? Remember. All right, I'm still not high. I had a slow gin fizz episode when I was a junior in high school. I still remember it very well. And it's reminiscent of that, right? Take it, I'm not high. Give me another. Take it, not high. I'm going to take another. So now I've got 30 milligrams of that little chocolate bar, which was probably fabulous. And now I am so high, I can't get off the couch. Somebody better take me to the ER. That's what's happening, right? Because it's the great unknown, and it's in your workplace. So are you guys going to have the person who's the person? Again, I want to challenge the notion of safety sensitive as we keep going through these slides or I'll get in trouble. Oh, no, I'm on good time. Okay, so you want to challenge the notion, and you want to say, is it good or bad, or is it numbers, right? So put aside anything personal and look at the numbers. There are numbers out there. We don't have the impact on marijuana. It's too new. So we're getting some data. You got to be creative. You've got to look at, how do I do this, right? How do I look at the return on investment? There are some tools, more tools are being developed that says, hey, National Safety Council, I believe, has this little calculator. And you can go in and you can say, all right, if I'm a construction industry with 500 people in these 3 states, what is the cost of drug use in my workplace? And that's the way you get some of these statistics. So that's where these were pulled from. I've got 500 worker construction company in Illinois. You could face $57,387 in annual costs. Like, we just ran through, this was an article, but you can run through and you can do the numbers. You've got to start to do that. And when you say, oh, I don't want to pay to have my policy updated, look at item number 2, right? None of these, by the way, usually cover what the lawyers are going to charge you. That's usually not included. They're good people, but they cost a lot of money. So you take these types of numbers, and now what you've got to say is, I'm in New York, I'm in Illinois, I'm in Nevada, I'm in all of the states that are going to take that law and use it in their state and start to talk about impairment, because they aren't asking us in the industry. They're writing a heck of a lot of articles. They're doing a lot of news. You get to do, I like know what a B-roll is. I do these interviews. I feel very fancy. I talk on the thing, then they clip it down to 3 seconds, and then it goes and it's on the news. My mother says, I don't know how to play that. Could you come and like drive 2 hours and show me how to click on it? It's cool, you're fancy, and you're on the news. And then everybody forgets about it because we're not being active as employers and saying, holy hell, this is coming and it's going to cost us a lot of money. So you've got to do that. You've got to go to the powers that be, and maybe you are a person of, you're an independent trucking company, then you're the power that be. If you're a giant organization, you got to do your numbers and you've got to roll it up to those people and say, we've got to get active because this is a risk and a cost. A risk and a cost. And that's what's important. So you use numbers like these. You use the numbers you're seeing that are new, and you start to put the value. And it's not that difficult, because trust me, I'm not that good at math. Do this, right? What's the cost in lawsuits? This was from a study, and we just pulled. What is the average cost for an employer with 500 employees or less to settle a case against them, or if they lose it? Start to do that. And so again, the answer is, if you're not keeping up, if you're not active, if you're not modifying what you do and how you do it, are you willing to take on this percentage of loss? And if you're pro or con, here or there, whatever you are, compare it to alcohol, but it's more complicated. But alcohol costs workplaces tons of money every year. Lost, productivity, accidents. So you've got to know that's happening. So this is happening in every different respect, and you've got to look deeper, right? It's not just how many by the way, you could start to look, is there a creep up in workers' comp claim? Now, oddly, when you look at some of the numbers in these states that are legal, the comp rates are going down. So it's, again, part of that idea of plotting this work, the hurricane, I don't know why, but it is going down in certain places. So you've got to watch it, but look at your workers' comp claims, right? Look at your premiums, look at your accidents. Accidents are a lagging measure. So if you say, back to that very first couple slides, and we said how many of you are just doing pre-employment, like 75% of your testing is pre-employment. Here's the fear, right? If I go off that same paleo diet that I'm not on, and I carb load all week, and I get on the scale, the damage is done, right? Damage is done. The scale's a lagging measure. What you've got to do is all the behaviors over here, and they should be correct so that when you get on the scale, it's good news. Post-accident testing is absolutely critical, but it's a lagging measure. You've already had the problem. And workplace drug testing is not precise. And in these states where the challenges are going to come up, is somebody going to come to you and say, hey, prove I was impaired. I got a good lawyer, prove I was impaired. I'm 21 years old. I ate a whole candy bar on Saturday night, but I'm fine now. Prove I was impaired. So I'm not going to tell you how you do it, but you got to be thinking about all this stuff. So you've got to look at all of those costs, and you've got to put it in and start thinking about all of this as a risk mitigation strategy as well. And when you do that, you'll see improvement. But again, not super easy. This is not something that's like super easy where you say, yeah, we ran payroll and it's up 3% or down 7%, right? Some of them are easier when you say our costs are going up for our health care. But for you to then be able to say, our costs are going up for our health care, and I firmly believe that it's specifically associated to the increase of drug use based, that's harder, right? But you still have to try and do that work. The risks of not testing are these, and the risk of having safety-sensitive carve-outs that are so severely limited to physical safety, it's an outdated concept, right? It's an outdated concept. So the idea of safety-sensitive only meaning physical safety doesn't take into account all of these things. Damage to your company brand, right? Front page of the Washington Post, front page of the New York Times, and not for a good reason. Damage to property, negligence claims, right? I just saw a negligence claim. It wasn't due to, it was not due specifically to drug testing, but it was a $54 million claim, and it was upheld in an appellate court. That's a lot of money. How many drug tests would you have run for $54 million, right? So decrease in your product. Those are the things that are those downstream that are harder to quantify, but you've got to do it. So you got to be rethinking this, right? This is the last piece of it. I'm not going to, again, tell you how to do it, but I want you to rethink about it. You've got to be looking at regulations. You've got to be looking at legal. You've got to be paying attention, and I encourage everybody to start getting active. Active with SHRM, active with National Safety Council, right? All of these safety industries, that's a great place to start. Great place to start. Occupational Health and Safety magazine, they do articles. You got to do it. If you've got unions, you really need to start getting active, because we're not going to roll it back, right? And again, I'm not saying that marijuana is evil. I'm just saying it has posed a very large complication and a very big cost for employers. So you've got to get active in the places that you can be active to at least slow it down and at least make sure that the laws are taking into account what you want to do for risk mitigation in your workplace. You got to look at your budget. Everybody has a budget, right? So you've got to look at that. There are ways that you can curtail increases in spending and different things that you do in your workplace, right? You can do, everybody in the room should be doing post-hire testing if you're allowed in that state, right? But you should look. There are 12 states that have voluntary workers' compensation premium discounts. Are you taking advantage of it, right? There are states where there are denial laws that say, hey, if after an accident or if for unemployment benefits, there's a positive drug test result and you terminate them, then you can deny those benefits. It sounds super mean, but again, not personal, it's business, right? So you need to look at that. You want to look at the design of your program, right? DISA works with, they do all of these things, right? Sit down and look at the design of your program. If you were that person who says, all we do is urine test for pre-employment, sit down and say, well, let me think about this. Like, why are we doing drug testing? Can we do drug testing? What are we hoping to accomplish with drug testing? Are we making our spend the best spend, right? You've got to design it. You really kind of have to like break it down to build it back up. And that's what's important. And again, you're not going to do it for 2020, but you got to be thinking about this as a strategy and a budget. You got to be looking at the different drug testing methodologies. You do not, again, I'm not a scientist, right? Like a DL isomer, I like theoretically know what it is, but I don't really understand half of the stuff that I talk about all the time, right? What I do know is what are the pros and cons of urine testing, right? There are pros and cons. There's not one on this list that's good. There's not one on this list that's bad. They're just different, right? They're just different. So what are we hoping to accomplish in our workplace? What is the budget we are trying to make? Where are we doing business? It is not one size fits all any longer. You need to be creative. You might say, hey, we're going to use a combination of several different drug testing methodologies. For certain positions, we're going to use hair testing because we do need to make a lifestyle choice. But now let me see, am I going to get in trouble with that because of a new law, because of marijuana? You got to know, right? I'm going to be in a state, I can't get seats in, right? So the reality is I got to fill these seats, and we're low unemployment, right? So I'm comfortable with people using marijuana on their own time if it's not coming into the workplace, right? That may be your stance. So what would you do with that, right? How would you handle that in your workplace? Are you going to think about pre-access testing? There's a lot of different things. Do you know what the window of detection is between all of these different methods? Because you want to know that, and then it just has to be non-discriminatory. It doesn't have to be the same, right? It doesn't have to be the same. So what you can say is, for this group of employees, we're choosing this drug testing methodology for these test reasons. For this group, we're going to do this. It's more complicated. It's more difficult in many cases until you get the rhythm to manage. But then eventually it becomes your new normal, right? Your new normal, and then it works. And it is a risk mitigation strategy. So traditional pre-employment is being challenged. So I challenge you then to look at your program and say, what else can we do? Can we, it's a preventative action. So how can I replace that in my workplace if it starts to be challenged, and if we're not successful in getting workplace safety or workplace protections in there and testing protections in all of these states? So you want, pre-employment deters the use. So what can you do to deter the use in your workplace? There's a lot of different things, but you've got to be creative. You've got to always think now about impairment and how you're going to handle it. You've got to think about post-employment. It should really be post-hire testing, right? Post-hire testing. So it still identifies drug users. Random testing. If you can do random testing, it's fabulous, because what is it? It's both a deterrent and a detection. But it's deterrent that's key. And it's not getting on the scale after the damage is done, right? It's eating right during the week, post-employment, post-access, pre-access testing, right? A new term I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about as these technologies come to market, as technologies and laws start to come to market that help us more closely identify impairment, then can you do pre-access? I'm okay with what you did on the weekend, but you can't show up here impaired. You cannot come on our work site. We're not willing to take it. We don't want the risk. So we're going to see that as a preventative measure. We're thinking it's going to, right? But it's going to increase, and that's what's important. It's not going to increase if they don't let you challenge what safety sensitive is. Because right now, safety sensitive is still physical employment, or physical for the most part, right? So again, you've got to go and you've got to say, we as an employer have an extraordinary exposure if we're letting all of our people who have access to 5 million people's credit cards. I don't want your identity theft protection after the fact. I want you to take care of it now. I don't want the person who's going to be using on the job and make a mistake, right? And that's what it is, because again, remember the good human, bad human. Again. Right? I'm not saying you're a bad human being. I'm not saying because you use drugs, you abuse drugs. Those are two different things. But I need to really cover the entire landscape in my program and take care of both of those. So if you're using recreational at home on the weekend and you're really not touching it, maybe you won't be absent more often, right? But what I don't know is, again, we can't use just the historical data on THC, to predict what it's going to look like because it's a different creature, just like we couldn't use the historical information on Tylenol 3 with codeine to predict what happened with opioids and fentanyl and oxycodone, right? It didn't work. And now we're in the same boat. So you've got to really be thinking about how you're going to do that. And you've got to be doing things that are risk mitigation strategy rather than just simply the 6 years of experience in the MBA. The safety sensitive position, challenging it, changing it, working in the workplace. And again, there just has to be rhyme and reason, but you can be challenged. And so you've got to continue, as these laws are changing the rules, you've got to change the rules and start to say, we want to change the definition of safety sensitive to go beyond physical safety and these standard drug test, safety sensitive positions. But as a workplace, we want to increase safety sensitive. And then, by the way, people, we don't have time, right? Because I already had 800 slides. Then you start to think about all sorts of things like fitness for duty and fitness for duty outside of being physically able and things like that. So you've got to think about that too. You want to redefine safety sensitive. We saw this slide before. This is why you want to redefine safety sensitive, because safety is not the only liability, right? It's an unfortunate thing if you have an accident at a workplace. It's a bigger unfortunate thing if you blow up a rig out in the middle of an oil field. But it's also a big issue if you have that data breach. And right now, it's technically not allowed to be safety sensitive. So you've got to really start to be a proponent of changing those rules. Prescription drugs, we talked about it a little, but it's the same issue, right? It's not easy. So if I'm impaired in a safety sensitive job, do I have a drug disclosure program in my workplace that says, even if Nina's taking that 5 milligrams as prescribed by her doctor, she can't do that job. We're not willing to take the risk that she's going to do that data breach or crash that forklift. And so we need to have drug disclosure programs in place. And it's a more sophisticated workplace risk mitigation strategy because you're then having a rule that says, hey, you don't have to tell me why you're on it. You don't have to tell me, but you have to take your job description to your doctor. And your doctor has to say, yeah, it's okay for her to do this job. I saw the job description. It's okay. And if not, then they say, yeah, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. So here's the options. You can take, just plain old Advil, or you go to your HR person. You don't have to tell them what's wrong, but you say, I can't perform my essential job functions, so I'm going to go into a different job. Then you go into that ADA and FMLA, right? I was a slide ahead of myself. So this is job disclosure, and this is like the Reader's Digest version of job disclosure, right? But that's really what that is. That's the concept of it, but it's an advanced workplace drug testing and risk mitigation strategy probably many of you don't have or haven't considered. Testing for prescription drugs, again, guys, you got to remember the MROs, it is a pregnancy test in essence, right? You're either pregnant or you're not. They are not telling you anything more than pregnant or not. So your policy has to handle it. You don't know if you just found out you're pregnant or if you've had a baby since that result came through, right? So the MRO is just saying to you, this is the data that we have for you. Your policy and your procedures in your workplace then determines what you're going to do with that data. Are you going out to buy maternity clothes or are you going out to buy a baby blanket? You've got to make the decision. It has to be in your policy. And if you only have a DOT policy and you don't have a non-DOT policy, you've got to be thinking about all that, because when they give you if the MRO gives you a safety concern, they're going to tell you remove that person from a safety sensitive position, but they're not necessarily then going to tell you what to do with them. And so you've got to have all of that in your policy as well. And then this is a term, again, that I think is going to become more prevalent as we move through this over the next 20 years or so. Hopefully I'll be retired somewhere at some point. But this, right, recovery supportive workplace. So along that lines of looking at how much risk you've got, looking at the safety you've got, recovered people are not bad people, right? And so does your workplace, through their testing and your support of recovery, right? So there are statistics, again, that you can dig up that says how good recovered employees are. But as a risk mitigation strategy, what you want to say is after you come home from that 60-day inpatient treatment program, you're going to have and by the way, you use a substance abuse professional for this. You don't do it on your own. But you say, look, here's the deal. It's okay to come back. you're going to sign an agreement with us, and it's a last chance agreement. They call it a bunch of different things, but really what you say is, we're going to continue to test for you. And the SAP will tell you, right? If it was one drug, then it's maybe one testing sequence. If it was a different drug, it could be a different sequence, right? But what they would say is, this is what you're going to test. And part of your agreement with us, we're going to support your recovery. This is going to be twofold. The follow-up testing is actually going to keep you sober more likely than not. There's statistics that prove that, right? We're going to continue to do follow-up testing with you. As we do that follow-up testing, we are going to support your recovery, and we're going to allow you and all of your information and all of your history and all of your experience in our industry and our company, we're going to allow you to be here. So training, we're over because my timer's off. So training is critical. DISA has training for every single drug testing rule. But again, feet on the streets. As we're moving towards impairment, you want all of those eyes looking. So you don't want just your supervisors trained, you want your employees trained as well, and they got to know the policy, and they kind of really have to understand all of these issues and the complexities of them in your workplace. So you can get this information from DISA, but training on that policy once you get it is critical. And cases are being won and lost because of how somebody handles confronting an employee. So it's important. So I'm not going to go through that. Certifications and audits as well. This isn't a sales thing. These guys didn't tell me to put it in here, but I had it, so I did. Super important as well, right? If you're concerned about how you can design your program and your policy, have it reviewed, have an audit done, and make sure that you go in and you're done, and your program is up to date, and you're going to pass scrutiny in the states you're in and under the regulations you've got. And so that is the end. We're going to close out. I appreciate you coming. On to the next.